Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here, and I have the Ayato FreezeCom video ready for you guys today. I'm sorry it took a bit of time because I actually did test out the rotation and try to simulate as best as I could. So I'm pretty confident that the rotation works well. Obviously, we still have to playtest the Ayato version just to make sure that everything is correct when Ayato is released. So we have the Ayato FreezeCom damage. So other than the FreezeCom rotation energy, we have the Ayato FreezeCom damage itself. HyperCarry versus Freeze Team, Ayato main versus Ganyu main in the FreezeCom. I'm not gonna talk about this. This makes more sense when I go through the actual section itself. Artifact comparison for Torgana and TLDR. So TLDR is basically a TLDR of each of the 7 sections before it. And the conclusion, as well as the Ayato video series. Alright, now let's go right in. Ayato FreezeCom. So Venti, budget is sucrose. Obviously you can use Kazuha, but I prefer use Kazuha in a HyperCarry com really. And besides, Venti's pool is really good for Ganyu FreezeCom. So that's Venti, the animal for the pool and resistance strat. Then you have the Ganyu instance Ayaka, which is your cryo top tier DPS. You have Ayato, the Hydro 18 seconds applicator just from burst, plus AoE, plus quadratic schooling, and his E has a decent AoE as well. And you have Diona, Cryo battery shoulder healer, the alternate for Shenhe. I'm not going to talk much about this, but basically you use Shenhe if you are a Giga Chat who doesn't require shield or heal. Technically speaking, Freeze can allow you to drop shield and heal comfortably other than corrosion. By the way, Shenhe's passive can buff Ayato's attacks as well. The passive, not the stacks buff. But the thing about Shenhe is that she will take up more on field time and extend your rotation. And you'll see more why I say that in the rotation section itself. And obviously you can use other alternates like Rosaria, Keiya, etc. For the purpose of today's video, I will focus on the comp with Ganyu and Diona, which is the original Morgana setup. This is really the original Morgana setup. As I said, the difference here is you replace Mona with Ayato. So it's essentially Torgana, if you want to follow the Morgana naming for the classic FreezeCom. Or maybe Gantona. But I personally like Torgana more. Yeah. So the beauty of Ganyu together with Ayato plus animal pooling gives you some really crazy quadratic scaling on both of their bursts. Okay, essentially making such that you have 50 Ganyu Icicles and 32 Ayato Q strikes hitting each enemy in the entire pool, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. And along with Venti's damage figures, it's going to be quite spectacle in terms of the different number of damage figures you'll see. And this also makes this the ultimate AoE team, in my opinion. If you have been using Morgana recently, you'll know that it's harder and harder to clear Abyss Floor 12 because the damage is not enough, while Mona gives you a nice 60% buff at level 10 Omen. And the Q damage when the bubble pops, I said that sometimes the bubble doesn't pop because you maintain the Omen buff all the way until the mob dies. Okay, so that's another thing to consider. It's not really enough because Diona doesn't really help with damage. Right? Diona doesn't really help with damage. That's also the reason why people are switching to other characters like Rosaria. Because Rosaria at least gives you crit rate and a higher Q damage. That's another reason. Now, swapping Diona out for Shenhe does help with this DPS issue. So now, let's see, instead of swapping Diona out for Shenhe, let's replace Mona with Ayato. We keep Diona, see if this is good. And using Ayato with Diona also helps to free up Kokomi for other comps like EC. Because Kokomi is getting increasingly popular as a Hydro applicator as well as healer. Okay, let's talk about rotation. I have playtested this rotation several times. I've gone through several iterations with different types of E's and different order, etc. Okay, so this is the rotation that I find to be the most ideal. You do Ayato Q, Venti E Q, Ganyu Q E, Ayato E, Venti E, Diona E Ho, Ganyu E, and Diona E Ho with Sacrificial. You'll notice that we are not using Diona E Ho right at the start, since we are mostly casting bursts before Diona E, so you should not require shield because you're getting a lot of iframes here. And neither do you need shield for Ayato. Do we need shield for Ayato because he has an increased resistance to interruption during his E, which means that he will not be interrupted. And not to mention there's freeze. You're freezing most of the enemies. You're safe. So the rotation above ensures Hydro infused Q for the 15 energy refund that Venti provides because Ayato is hungrier than Ganyu for energy. Because Ayato needs 80, Ganyu needs 60. So that's why we are infusing Hydro on Venti's burst. Now, not to mention Ayato's Q also lasts longer, so it's fine to cast his Q first. Longer than Ganyu's Q. 18 versus 15. Now, in order to hit 20-second rotation, we're actually not using any Ganyu charge attacks at all, you notice? It's very, very different from when I did the Shenhe freeze comb. Right? Shenhe for Ganyu freeze comb. We are not using any Ganyu charge attacks at all. Because Ayato takes up all the on-field time that the rotation can offer anyway. It's taking up 6 seconds. Now I know that in HyperCarry, we were complaining that 6 seconds was too short of a duration, right? It becomes bursty, but yet still not as bursty as a one-shot in a sense. So it's a bit confusing, but you'll see how well it fits with FreezeCom. Because you basically use him as the main here, while Ganyu is built as a full off-field DPS. And Thundering Powers of Skyward Heart will be better than Amos, and 4-star will be Elite Hunter for Ganyu. So you kind of respect your Ganyu to use a different weapon, but you don't need to change the artifacts per se. Unfortunately, 20 seconds is the fastest we can go here, instead of 15 seconds like Morgana, because Ayato cooldown is 20 seconds, the burst. You can also use Venti E right before Ayato E here, right here, if you need more energy. Cooldown wise, it will be ready both before and after Venti E, because Venti E press is 6 seconds cooldown, which is just nice. After the Ayato E, you are ready again, if you do it in front, before. But it will extend the rotation by 1 second to 21 seconds. This is a very, very tight rotation. This is exact 20 seconds. If you hesitate a moment, it will take more than 20 seconds. It's pretty tight. Okay, and likewise for Diona Q, her burst, we are not using it. We only use it when we need heal, because and that's even if you have 4-piece Noblesse effect, because it will extend your rotation by 1.5 to 2 seconds. So generally speaking, you don't want to extend your rotation. You want to keep your rotation nice and tight. That's the best DPS that you can do over a long run. Obviously, if you use 4-piece Noblesse and use Diona's Q, you will see higher damage on your E in terms of what you actually see in-game. But if you consider the 20 seconds versus the extended time, the 20 seconds will be better. It's not something that's very tangible per se, but it is there. Okay. So now that I've talked about the rotation, very, very nice and tight rotation, let's talk about the energy. Okay, the energy in the rotation, what is the amount of energy we'll get in the rotation, and what is the ER requirement we will need. I have extended to do math on energy. If you guys have been following my videos, this is the first time I do math on energy, man. So for freeze comb, 100% burst uptime is very important, since it's all about spamming your burst for the freeze combo, right? So this is the reason why I went to the extent of doing this. And you will see, this follows the exact order of the rotation. Okay, this is the ER value on Venti, this is without allergy, this is with stringless. So you will have about 21.4 ER from the artifacts, because his ascension stat at level 90 gives you 32 ER, or level 80 plus. Now, Ganyu, we have 111.7% ER, Diona has 185.7, Ayato is 130 ER here. You see the rate figures here, this is the total amount of energy that we've gotten after the entire rotation ends, after the full 20 seconds. But this is the total energy without Venti's A1 effect, because Venti's A1 effect will give you 15 energy for Venti, as well as the element that is infused with. So in other words, our Ayato with Venti A1 gets 79 energy. And this is assuming there is about 12 seconds before we hit the 40 energy mark. Okay, 12 seconds before you hit the 40 energy mark. That's why we get 24 energy from its extension. And you see an asterisk here is very simple because the Ganyu explosion happens 6 seconds after it's cast or when it's destroyed. So we are going to assume that 6 seconds, and our Ayato will use his second Q before this explosion happens. That's why this is not counted, at least for the first rotation. But from the second rotation onwards, obviously it will be, right? Because your Ayato, after using his Q, he can receive this energy, which is this amount. This asterisk here will be this amount. Okay? So, if you look at these figures here, what does it tell you? It's very, very close to the burst, because this is the amount that you need from the burst. Now, before I go there, let me just quickly talk about this portion here. All of this is just the energy from the skills. I have not included the energy orbs or particles from enemies yet. So on average, it should be about 10 energy from enemies, typically. I mean, obviously some scenarios have less when you're against one single boss, or some scenarios have more, especially against 2 or more, 3 ruin guards or graders, or multiple treasure hoarders. From my recommended rotation, if you're using Venti, you pretty much have 100% burst uptime. Why? Just look at this figure versus this figure. For Venti, 2+ away, Ganyu 4+ away, Ayato 1 away. And once you factor in the energy from enemies, for sure you get your 100% burst uptime. The only person that's a bit off is Diona. Right? Diona may be a little off, but like I said, you're not casting Diona Q unless healing is required. So it's not so bad. And if you really do need more, if you really want to use her Q on every burst, your rotation will be extended, your DPS is affected, but if you really want to, then you have to increase the ER value here. Okay? If you don't have Venti, then obviously you will require more ER on your animal character. You see here is quite a difference, 18, right? 18 is not, it's higher than the average energy that you will get per se. Now, 130 ER is a sweet spot for every character because all you need is 5 base rolls of ER on your artifact, no upgrades required. So obviously getting more ER will have a bigger impact on your DPS crit stats. So I mean for Venti it's different because he has 32 ER from Ascension. But let's say if you use someone like Kazuha, you will not have 32 ER, so you definitely need more than that. If you want to maintain Kazuha burst here as well. Although Kazuha can, and you probably have to use more of Kazuha's E, because that's how you pull. So there's a different setup on that. Now, if you have Venti, it does feel like 130 ER is overkill on Ayato, right? Because you're only 1 energy away from burst without getting any energy from enemies. So let's optimize it further. Let's go with 110 ER instead of 130. With 110 ER, you see that we are at 72.9, so about 73. We are still 7 energy away from the burst, and 7 energy is less than the average that you will get typically. So this is really good. Basically this works. And 110 ER with Ayato, basically what it does is that it frees up 3 base rolls for HP, not attack or crit, assuming you already have those as base stats. So actual DPS increase is not much if your artifacts are really well rolled, but it still helps. And in the event you don't have those base stats, those 3 rolls can give you better impact as crit rolls. Because no matter what, they are 3 rolls, okay? Be it whether it's a base stat or a upgrade. If it's a base stat, not as much of an impact. If it's not a base stat, then you can get more crit damage rolls, which helps a lot with your DPS. And like I said, you only need 7 energy from enemies, so easily achievable. So the conclusion we have is simply Ayato 110 ER good enough for 100% burst uptime in a Ganyu Friscon with Venti. And if you need, just refer to the ER values if you want to think about if you want to know how to build your characters. Oh, and by the way, it's just a coincidence that Diona E gives the same energy for both the Ganyu and Diona, even though Ganyu is the one receiving the energy. Because the difference between the on-field and off-field just happens to be negated by their ER values. Remember, Diona has a lot more ER than Ganyu. And obviously, you switch to Ganyu to collect particles from Diona E. Okay, this is standard battery play. Very, very straightforward. And the rotation does that as well. Okay, in my rotation, I already set it up nicely. After casting your Diana E-Hole, you should switch to your Ganyu to cast her E, and then you receive both particles, both characters' energy particles. Yeah. I have an important note though. For the skills above here, there is the Ganyu E explosion. Now, this E explosion is something that you can't really control per se, because it either explodes on cast, sorry, it doesn't explode on cast, it either explodes upon being destroyed or 6 seconds after cast. So you can't control the situation whether or not it will be able to get you energy, especially the 6 seconds after cast. Upon being destroyed is not so bad, right? If there's an enemy nearby that destroys it, then you will get the energy. The 6 seconds after cast, however, is something that you can't control. It could be right between waves of the enemy, and you clear the first wave and the second wave has not been moved into the region or the AoE yet. So that may be possible. So that's why it's best to leave allowance for that, which is the reason why we are going with 110 instead of 100. Because if you look at this energy, you know that if you go 100, it's doable as well. A little tight, but doable. But like I said, it's better to go for 110. And even if you do end up with 130 ER because of how your artifact upgrades go, right? It's fine. It's fine in my opinion, because since it just means you have guaranteed 100% uptime even against single boss. Think of it that way. So it's not end of the world if you get more ER than 110. But if you get more ER than 130, then yeah, you should optimize. Okay? Okay, now we have completed the rotation, we talked about the energy. Now let's look at the damage. Unfortunately, the only buffs to Ayato's damage in the freeze comp with the rotation I spoke about at the comp is the 4-piece VV effect, which is still one of the best effects, and a 15% CR from Cryo Resonance. The additional options, they are not included in my math. Elegy for the end if you have it. Or should I say elegy? Sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce this. C4 Ganyu's effect, I have not calculated it. You have the Diana 4-piece Nobliss as well if you do use a Q for healing. So for C4 Ganyu, right, it's about 10% increase when you start attacking Ayato's E, 15% for the next 3 seconds, and 20% for the last 2 seconds. But to simplify my math, I'm not including this. Okay. Sorry. So this is the damage in freeze comp with 110 ER, and this is the 20-second rotation. Sorry, this is also 110 ER. Okay. So from the figures, right, it should be clear that Ayato's E versus his Q. Let's look at C0R1, okay? C0R1 versus Q. It's about the same. 203k and 212k. It's approximately equal at C0. But when you go C6, it's almost double, especially if you have R5. Okay? So in other words, right, in a freeze comp, you should use Ayato's E. It is still a bigger damage contributor than his burst. Pretty straightforward stuff. Now let's look at HyperCarry versus freeze. Now typically I don't like to compare these two because the result is very, very expected. But I feel the need to talk about it because the previous video was about HyperCarry. So probably some comparison is better. So this is the HyperCarry DPS that we have. You'll notice that the figures are slightly lower because I kind of reduced the burst damage figure because to factor for the Jade scaling. Previously we were assuming that Jade scaling is always there, but if you think about it, HyperCarry is usually against bosses, so it should be reduced. But it's not much of a reduction if you notice. Okay. And HyperCarry is obviously better than freeze comp. It's about 31 to 38%. But this is not surprising, right? Because any character in a HyperCarry comp would do more than in a freeze comp due to the difference in the number of buffs involved. But the advantage of freeze comp lies in the freeze as well as the AoE. Okay? So that's the reason why. And I updated the HyperCarry comp figure to assume that only 16 out of the 32 strike each of the opponent. Since Kazuha's pool is momentary, you're not going to be able to do the Jade scaling all the time. So that is very, very straightforward for HyperCarry versus Freeze. Now, it doesn't mean that HyperCarry is better than Freeze, by the way. You don't look at it that way. I'll talk more about that later. In terms of Ayato's position in FreezeCom, role in FreezeCom as well as in HyperCarry. Let's look at the juicy stuff. Ayato main versus Ganyu main in FreezeCom. Because when we do Ayato in the FreezeCom, Ayato is the main, not Ganyu, right? So let's see the difference here. Now, the important comparison here, as opposed to the HyperCarry versus Freeze, this is the more important comparison. Against Ganyu is charge attacks and Ayato's E between these two. Without Ayato, Ganyu CA is your main source of DPS, right? So during, or rather Ganyu CA is the main source of DPS during your burst in Torgana, while your burst is ongoing. Your burst is also obviously also the DPS, but burst is present with Ayato as well in the Ayato Ganyu FreezeCom. That's why I don't want to talk about it, but I'll talk about it just a little bit here. Now, typically in FreezeCom, I actually did a couple of tests with this. My C6R5 Ganyu is charge attack, does approximately 60 plus K if I include the initial plus the bloom. So the two hits add together to about 60 plus K. With Mona's Omen buff is about 90 plus K. Ganyu can fire off about 3 charge attacks without using C6 effect in the time it takes Ayato to complete this E. If you have the C6 effect and you have the right hotkeys for it, or okay, I shouldn't say right hotkeys, it's more like on controller, right? On PC I'm playing with controller. Controller you can't do it. But if you're using PC keyboard, you can do it. The difference is because you press a button and you enter a mode on keyboard, but on controller you have to hold. That holding takes time. That's the reason why. So anyway, it's 180 to 210k without Mona's Omen buff, and 270k to 300k with Mona's Omen buff. Now let's recap the raw damage that Ayato does in 6 seconds of E. This is the damage. At C0R1, Ayato with 4 echoes, 6 trigger. This figure here, the average number of triggers, is 214k damage, or if I really want to round up and be exact, it's 215, but that doesn't really matter because it's already more than C6R5 Ganyu's 3 charge attacks without Mona's Omen buff, which is the 180 to 210k that we talk about. At C6R5, Ayato with 4 echoes, 6 triggers, sorry, here, can dish out 512k damage, which is a lot more than C6R5 Ganyu with Mona's Omen buff, 270 to 300k, right? 270 to 300k versus 512k. This difference, this absolute, in terms of absolute amount, this difference is almost like his burst, Ayato's burst. So it's a huge difference, really. No. Obviously, more factors to be considered, right? If you use keyboard, you might be able to get 1 more charge attack, not just 3, if you use a C6 Ganyu effect. But like I said, with controller I can't. Personally I can't, because of the way it works, and there's no way to change it in the settings. But bear in mind that I have also not included Ganyu C4 effect in these Ayato math figures. But but the 180 to 210k as well as the 270 to 300k does have the C4 effect, because those are the figures that we actually test in-game in Spiral Abyss Floor 12. Oh, another thing, I just realized the Ganyu figures, okay, slightly unfair to the Ganyu figures because the mobs levels are higher. Level 95 is not level 90, so the defense is slightly higher. So it might be slightly higher than this, but it's not going to make up for this 512k difference for sure. Okay. More importantly, I'm not trying to do like a 100% super fair comparison. It's just to give you an idea of how Ayato fits into the FreezeCom with Ganyu, the Ganyu FreezeCom damage-wise. This is not a Ayato Sim versus Ganyu Sim debate, because I have absolutely no interest in that. Okay? I'm not someone who needs my one specific character to be better than the other. Yeah, sorry, not me. In the first place, Ayato is a burst DPS. Ganyu is a consistent DPS. You can't really compare them per se. But FreezeCom's limited on-field duration is actually perfect for Ayato. I'll say he's literally designed for freeze comp in this aspect. And not to mention his Q, his AoE of his E, etc. All of this works very well in freeze comp. Just the on-field duration itself it already shows that it's literally designed for freeze comp. Okay, so I hope you can see from this simple comparison. Putting in Ayato to replace Mona and using him as the main rather than Ganyu will definitely give you more team damage overall for a freeze comp. Now, this is not meant to say that Ganyu is worse than Ayato, because Ganyu Melcom is still freaking strong. Okay, Ganyu Melcom is still freaking strong. The damage that she offers is still really good. Just not freeze comp. It's a change of the slight change in the roles, but it's okay. Ganyu is still very useful. Okay. Now, how about Mona's Omen buff on Ganyu's Q? We have to factor that in, right? Because when I replace Mona, I lose the Omen buff. Alright, so here's the thing. Mona's Omen buff, it lasts until the mob dies. While I was doing rotation tests against the floor 12 wolves, I was really struggling to get a charge attack hit with Omen buff still active, because they usually die before that. If you want to know how I managed to get the 60k figure that I saw, or rather the 90k figure I saw, it was with just the bloom. I had to hit the floor immediately, just so that I couldn't really aim the wolves. I had to hit the floor immediately just so that I can see the damage before the wolves died, because you got so many bursts ongoing. Now on bosses, this will not be an issue, but Mona's Omen does have such a condition attached to it, right? Okay. Oh, and if mobs die with Omen buff still on, your Mona's kill damage wouldn't happen as well because the bubble didn't pop. So you lose out on that too. Okay, now putting aside how much more damage Ayato's E provides versus Ganyu's charge attack due to his bursty nature, do you seriously think Ayato's Q will do less damage than Mona's Omen buff on Ganyu's Q? 32 quadratic skilling strikes, AoE strikes, for 18 seconds. Just the duration alone wins Omen buffs hand down, even if you extend the Omen buff. Because it's just 60%. I have actual AoE damage being done here. And not to mention, by switching Ganyu to sub DPS build, you can also switch to a weapon that can buff her Q as well. So like Alley Hunter, Skyward Harp, Thundering Pulse, all of these can work for her Q. Do you see now? Do you see now how much better this is for the Ganyu freeze comp per se? You optimize by increasing your Ganyu's burst damage. You put in a character that provides a much needed surge in damage through his bursty nature and his E. So yeah, Ayato will be a very strong addition to Ganyu freeze comp. Provides a second quadratic skilling burst, a bursty on-field E, and most importantly, you free up Kokomi for other comps if you already using Shen He with in Ganyu freeze comp. So personally, I can't wait to try him out in freeze comp. I think he will be really good. And don't get me started on Ayaka. He's literally made for Ayaka comp as well. But I'll talk more about that when we go through the Ayaka freeze comp with Ayato. I've not done the deep dive, but looking at just how their skills work, the mechanics, right? It's pretty sure that it's gonna be like 2 main DPS in one comp. It finally works. Not Ganyu and Ayaka, okay? I never ever believed in Ganyu and Ayaka together. That's just forcing a comp out. But Ayato and Ayaka, there's some really good potential there. Okay, let's do a quick comparison, artifact comparison for Torgana. So this is the figures, the DPS per second in the 20-second rotation. This is the percentage change, or rather the difference. So obviously for Torgana, Ayato's E still contributes more than his Q, right? So it's very unlikely that artifacts like Emblem or 2-piece 80% attack or 2-piece HAOD would be better. I'm just gonna outright say this, because I know that people ask me about this. Now, the conclusion actually there's no change. When to go for 4 echoes and when not to, there's really no change. The only difference is that some of the percentage figures are different. I'm not going to go through them per se. If you've already watched my artifact comparison video, you really don't need to. And I'll talk about it in the TLDR, but basically you go for 4 echoes for sure if you are at C0 C1 Ayato. If you are going for higher constellation for Ayato, your 4 echoes still offers better potential, but you take a risk of doing low damage when you have low triggers. That's about it. But I would still try for 4 echoes because average 6 trigger is mostly still better. You only have one rate negative figure here, C6R1. Okay. Now let's go into the TLDR section itself. I'll try to go faster now. Ayato Freezecom. So Ayato in a Ganyu Freezecom will replace Mona. You maintain Diona as the cryo battery, so effectively turning Morgana into Torgana. This also frees up Kokomi for other comps, since Kokomi is increasingly popular in the current meta comps. And she is required if you want to use Shenhe in Ganyu Freeze. Ayato is essentially an alternative option to boosting the Ganyu Freezecom damage. But we'll talk more about that later. Rotations. So this is the rotation itself. I'm not going to go through it. You can pause and look at it anytime you want. Ayato replaces Ganyu as the main in Freezecom because it takes up the limited on-field duration in Freezecom. He has 6 seconds of E. So you should respect your Ganyu to be a pure sub DPS. Artifact wise, no change. The only change would be the weapon. Okay? Because you really should not skip Ayato's E. Don't do that. Okay? Don't skip Ayato's E. That's where most of his damage is. It's almost double of his burst, even in Freezecom. So you can respect your Ganyu to use weapons like Alley, Hunter, Skyward Harp, or even Thundering Pulse if you are willing to do that one normal attack. But I would advise against that because that one normal attack is going to extend your rotation as well. Okay. To keep the rotation within 20 seconds, we are not using Venti when we're off cooldown because you can actually use Venti very frequently within the 20 seconds rotation. But you'll notice that I only use it twice. Once before his burst and once right after Ayato's E. And Diona's Q is used only when healing is required. Let me just fix this. Used only when healing is required. Okay. Let's talk about the energy that is obtained in rotation and the target ERs. Very simple one-liner. Okay. With Venti, 110 ER for Ayato is sufficient. Please refer to the 2 tables in the earlier energy section, section 3 I believe, chapter 3, for the details and the ER for other characters as well. Right? Ayato Freezecom damage. From the damage figures, Ayato's E versus his Q is approximately equal at C0. So when I talk about his E dealing more damage than his Q, sorry, I forgot to mention that that's for C6, because C6 is almost double. His E is almost double damage compared to his Q at C6. At C0, it's approximately equal. But even if it's 50-50, right, you should not skip his E. You should not just use him as a WS. It doesn't make sense because the E has such a huge contribution to his damage. Unless your Ayato artifacts are absolutely crap versus your Ganyus. But you'll eventually get there, so... I mean, even if it's absolutely crap, I think it will still be better to do the Ayato E. But I might be wrong, because I wouldn't have the chance to try crap artifacts versus build artifacts per se. Now, if you want to look at the damage figures, please refer to the earlier section, chapter 4. Okay? Or it might be chapter 5 in the video because I have an intro section. Now, HyperCarry versus Freeze. Goes without saying, Ayato in HyperCarry will deal more damage than in Freeze, is about 31 to 38%, but advantage of Freezecom lies in Freeze and AoE. Ayato main versus Ganyu main. Okay, this is a bit lengthy because I really have to explain more. At C0R1, Ayato with 4 echoes, 6 triggers, which is the average number of triggers, can dish out 214k damage in 6 seconds of E. That is already more than C6R5 Ganyu without Mona's Omen buff. It's about 180 to 210k. So it's still pretty close, but this is C6R5 Ganyu, this is C0R1 Ayato. Okay, that's the difference that's how bursty in damage that Ayato is versus someone who is consistent damage like Ganyu. At C6R5, Ayato with 4 echoes 60 can dish out 512k damage in 6 seconds of E, which is a lot more than C6R5 Ganyu's with Mona's Omen buff. It's about 270 to 300k, but bear in mind that these two figures here should be slightly higher because these were tested against level 95 mobs, but my math is based on level 90 mobs. Yeah, I overlooked that when I was doing the testing, but it's okay because that damage increase is not going to be able to match this. Maybe at this figure, but again, C6R5 versus C0R1. Okay, and then you have 512k here, which is no matter what against the level 19 mob, this no matter how this figure increases, it's not going to be matching this 512k. It's still going to be far from it. Okay. Now the above results are expected because Ganyu is a consistent DPS. Ayato is bursty. He only deals this amount of damage in his 6 seconds of E, and then that's it. Okay, so I'll say it's just that the limited on-field time in Freezecom suits him perfectly. And as for Mona's Omen buff to Ganyu's Q versus Ayato's Q, you can remember that Mona's buff will only last until the enemy is dead, and Mona's Q damage wouldn't happen if you don't pop it as well. If you don't pop the barber. So there is a condition to this. And go try out the current floor 12-1 moves. That will be a good example. Like I said earlier in the specific session, I was struggling to get my Ganyu CA to hit, because the wolves usually die before that, the smaller wolves. So Ayato's Q also does 32 strikes with quadratic scaling and lasts for 18 seconds, so it would definitely be better than Mona, just comparing this aspect alone. There's no way that a burst with such awesome scaling and so much number of strikes with AoE will be worse off than a buff that's 60% more and conditioner. Okay, now switching Ganyu to a pure sub DPS, because when you're using Ayato, your Ganyu should be switched to a pure sub DPS. It also means that you can change your weapon to focus on her Q rather than a charge attack. So example, Alley Hunter, Skyward Harp, Thundering Pulse. Okay, this will help with her burst damage. Especially Alley Hunter, it actually increases quite a fair bit. Artifact comparison for Torgana. Conclusion is same as per my previous math guides, thus no change. So if you want specific details, check out the section itself. Next is the conclusion. Now, while Ayato is not top tier in the HyperCarry comp, we've already established that previously in my HyperCarry comp video, so check that out if you need to, or if you are interested. I'll put it in the top right corner as well as in the in-video links. In Freezecom, Ayato does increase the overall team damage by a significant amount because of his high bursty damage E, as well as his quadratic scaling Q, lasting a full 18 seconds. So I would say he's better suited to Freezecom than HyperCarry comp. But obviously if you don't have other characters for HyperCarry, he can Void Field that Void too. But personally, I really like him in Freezecom, based off what I have analyzed so far. And I can't wait to try him out because his short on-field time is a perfect match for the short on-field time in Freezecom. It's really perfect. And more importantly, he provides a much needed surge in damage for Ganyu Freezecom. Because Ganyu Freezecom, not gonna lie, it is starting to fall off with the high amount of HP that the enemies have right now in Abyss. It's still doable, but it's no longer as good as before, right? I mean, before you can do it with a lot of time to spare. Now sometimes it's a little tight. It is a little tight. Okay, so yeah, really interested to see him in Freezecom. I think Freezecom might be his true calling, but I have not done the math for Taser or EC com, so maybe he will be good there as well. But right now, Freezecom really suits him very well, because in the first place, Freezecom has very limited on-field time because of all the Qs and Es that you have to do. Right, so I hope the conclusion has been helpful to you guys, or the overall TLDR as well. And I hope you guys are as excited as I am for him in Freezecom. Now, let's talk about Ayato video series. I have completed the artifact, we have completed the HyperCarry and the Ganyu freeze. So what's next is Ayaka freeze and Taser/EC com, yeah? Then the rest remains, the rest of the items in the pipeline. So if you like the content, remember, okay, wait, sorry, before that I should talk about this. If you, I would encourage you to join me over on Twitch, because if you have any questions, join me on Twitch, because I answer almost every question there. And I don't really have the time sometimes to really look at comments in detail. Okay, so yeah, to join me over on Twitch, I'll try my best to look at comments as well. If you like the content, remember my video and click subscribe for more. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Bye.